Lizzie Weisman and Indigo Catton present The Devil's Dye, the story of indigo's transformation from a luxury import to a commonly used dye.
The indigo plant, or Indigo tictoria, is native to Africa. The leaves of the indigo plant can be made into a strong dye that produces a stunning blue color. Traditionally, the leaves were pounded to extract the color, allowed to dry, then fermented with water and ash to produce cakes of this valued dye.
Indigo is also considered to have mystical and healing properties. It was used as body paint, an antiseptic, and a stimulant. It was burned to ward off evil spirits, and its brilliant blue color was used in all major religions to symbolize holiness. This exotic, enchanting commodity was prized in Europe. However, the consumption of exotic indigo threatened woad farmers in England. Woad also produced a blue dye, but it was pale and dull in comparison to indigo. Thus, the English launched a campaign against indigo and called it dangerous and poisonous. In 1581, Queen Elizabeth I proclaimed that all such indigo in whose hands soever shall be found shall be forfeited and openly burned by the authority of the mayor, and upon pain that the dyer of everything so dyed shall forfeit the value of the thing so dyed, and the party offending to remain in prison.
By 1600, the bans were lifted. England had a monopoly on indigo from India, but it was difficult for them to control a steady supply and the prices fluctuated. This was partially due to the indigo riots in which Indian farmers refused to plant indigo. England decided to take matters into their own hands and formed a new indigo plantations in colonies of Jamaica and South Carolina. England was now able to control the production and prices of its indigo supply. Because the process of indigo production was no longer a mystery, it was no longer considered a rare exotic good. Also, because supply had risen, prices had begun to drop, and more than just the highest classes could afford the dye.
In order to produce the massive amounts of indigo demanded by the British, slave labor was needed. These slaves were shipped over from Africa to work on these new plantations, and their living and working conditions were known to be atrocious. People began to view indigo as tainted because of the poor conditions under which it was made. They also thought of American indigo as being lower quality than Indian indigo they had previously imported. These factors, along with the new affordability of indigo, decreased indigo's reputation as a status commodity.
In the early 1800s, the East India Company took control of indigo production in India. England had recently lost control of the American colonies and could no longer rely on them for trade. However, the process in India was regulated similarly to the plantations in the colonies. Indians were forced to plant indigo and work on their own land, usually under terrible cruelty. The prices were controlled, ensuring a cheap indigo supply for England, and the quality was monitored so that Indian indigo was still seen as superior to American.
However, the indigo producers' terrible conditions were widely known in Europe. It was said by an Indian magistrate that not a chest of indigo reached England without being stained with human blood. I have seen several Indian peasants sent unto me as a magistrate who have been speared through the body. I have put on record how others have been first speared and then kidnapped, and such a system of carrying on indigo I consider a system of bloodshed. This fact, added to the knowledge of slave trade in the colonies, increased the association of indigo with badly treated workers, and thus further decreased indigo usage as a status.
From the 16th to 19th centuries, indigo was growing in popularity, no matter where it came from. Because trade had become fully regulated, prices were dropping, and there was more dye in the marketplace. Dungaree, a thick cotton fabric dyed with indigo, was used for sturdy work clothes and was often worn by sailors. As cotton also gained popularity, more and more men and women used indigo to dye it, but it was still not fully integrated into everyday life. Even with forced labor, production was not high enough to make indigo everyday wear.
In 1897, two German companies released a new manufactured form of indigo that was purer and more concentrated than the naturally occurring dye. This led to competition to create a synthetic indigo dye. This synthetic dye contained almost no elements from the actual plant. This caused a decrease in demand for indigo because now much more indigo could be produced in the same amount of time for less money. Popularity of synthetic indigo continued to rise. Denim was first produced in the late 1800s, but by the 20s, jeans were common among working men. John Wayne showed off his jeans in Western movies, and they became a symbol of ruggedness and individualism. The common man, and later woman, would proudly wear their jeans daily.